Hello and welcome back to Assetto Corsa, and we're continuing straight on with the Ferrari pack reviews. In today's episode we're going to be taking a look at the Ferrari 250 GTO. That's the 250 GTO, possibly the most desirable and also quite possibly the most valuable Ferrari ever built. I think only 36 of these were built between 1962 and 1964 if memory serves me correctly. But I mean, if you just look at this car, it's one of those Ferraris that you just look at it and you go, yep, that's a Ferrari and that's going to be worth an absolute fortune. And that is exactly what it's worth. I mean, the car itself, if you just take one glance at that, it looks very sleek, it looks very classy. As a matter of fact, to me, it looks like it has styling cues from something like an E-Type Jaguar. In fact, there is a lot of similarities I find personally between the front of this car and the front of an E-Type Jag. I'm assuming this is probably the era because that's all era specific, but it just shows, I mean, how valuable is an E-Type Jag now? How valuable is one of these? The only difference is that there were only 36 of these made. We're going to go right into the specs because obviously don't have much time on this. So the specifications for this, it is a V12 front engine rear wheel drive car. That's right, front engine rear wheel drive, which means that the characteristics of this car are going to be tending towards understeer when going into turns. I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. The V12 engine itself is 3 litres, 3-litre engine, and produces 302 brake horsepower at 7,500 RPM or 225 kilowatts, and I can't remember what the kilowatt conversion is, which I think is coming up around 296 PS or something like that, and 246 foot-pounds of torque or 333 newton meters at 5,500 RPM. It's an aluminium body with a steel section tubular frame, which obviously shows it's an old car. Aluminium was probably the lightest material you could get in the 1960s for the body, but the chassis is still that tubular steel, whereas nowadays all these supercars and hypercars and whatnot are all created with these carbon fiber, honeycomb lattice monocoques and all that kind of stuff. So obviously this is very different. Attached to the engine was a 5-speed manual gearbox, obviously sending the power all the way back to the rear wheel, so you had a differential and obviously the drive shaft down the back going all the way to the back. That means that this car, because it's a manual gearbox, and obviously it's got to be manual and it's old, you need to rev match this car. The rev matching is very, very important on this car, especially on downshift, so the car doesn't judder, the car doesn't want to spin out too violently with the additional torque that goes into the car. So you do have to be careful about that. I think the brakes were Dunlop discs all around, so I know you don't normally hear Dunlop brakes. You normally, if you're looking at Dunlop, you think tires, but Dunlop used to make brakes as well, so you had Dunlop disc brakes all the way around, and I think that pretty much covers most, if not all, of the specs. I may have forgotten to mention, but I'm assuming you can hear from this that it is naturally aspirated. You can't hear any turbocharger or anything like that. 0 to 60 takes 5.8 seconds, so that's pretty impressive, and I think 0 to 100 was 13.1 with a top speed of 158 miles an hour. However, the final drive ratio can be adjusted, so I'm assuming you could creep that up or down ever so slightly depending on what you wanted to do. That pretty much covers all the specs of this car. Of course, it is a masterpiece, but now to look at it in Assetto Corsa and how well it has been modeled, or how accurately it has been modeled, or maybe, as the case might be, not so accurately modeled. Let's find out. So the modeling to start with, well, that's accurate. That's definitely accurate. I have a look at that. I'm looking at that in the replay box. I'm sure you guys are too. I'm having a look at that inside, and the model looks pretty much bang on. The textures as well really match the model. It's very dated, it's very old, and it's very classic Ferrari. I've seen the inside of this car in real life, and it does look like that. I've seen photos and things like that. That is pretty accurate to what it is in real life. Now, what would have probably made it even more accurate was if there was a little gap here and there, because obviously these things are sort of handmade. We're talking about the 1960s here. There's no mass production. And come on, 34, was it, did I say 34? Yeah, 34 of them made. That's not going to be mass production at all. But, you know, that car really looks like it's been textured well, and it has been modeled really, really well. In terms of liveries or colors that you do get multiple colors, some of them with numbers, some of them without numbers. I've just gone for the plain red because, you know, plain red Ferrari. It's not Rosso Scuderia, it's Rosso, actually I don't know which color this would be in particular. Rosso Corsa maybe? I think it might be Rosso Corsa. That would be the actual color it is. It's not Rosso Scuderia though, so you can see it's a little bit duller than the normal bright red that you expect of Ferraris of nowadays. Sounds wise, going on to the sounds, Now, this is where I think this might be the first Ferrari or the Ferrari pack that I have seen that has a little bit of issues with sounds. It's not that the sounds are inaccurate, they are definitely accurate. The problem is, both inside and out, and more so inside than outside, they sound a little bit dull. Maybe that's the right word for it, dull or deadened. So inside, you've got the sound of the V12 engine, you know it's a V12, you can tell, but it sounds like there is a bass missing to it. There is a definite bass missing to that V12 engine. Obviously you can hear all 12 cylinders, and that's really accurate, but I think again, and this is something that I've mentioned a number of times with Assetto Corsa cars, is that the bass often is missing in them. Now with the other cars that I've reviewed so far, the bass seems to be there, but with this one, it's the first car of the Ferrari pack that seems to just have that missing. And the same can be said for outside. It's very nice, it's got a nice crackle, nice rumble, it's got a really nice feel, great treble on it, but that bass just needs to be adjusted ever so slightly to really give you that feeling of that V12 car. This is an old car, it's supposed to be loud, it's supposed to be brutal, noisy, lots of backfire, lots of crackling, but this just seems to just deaden it out just a little bit. Not a huge amount, not a huge amount at all, but it's just a little bit, and it's noticeable. It is definitely noticeable. So with that, I'm going to slightly be marking it down just because of that. Oddly enough, look at this corner. This is probably the first time I have ever done that corner right on the Nürburgring Nordschleife. So that's good. But that brings me on nicely to the physics of this car. Now for the physics of this car is a car you have to drive. You really have to drive this car. It's not one of those cars that, you know, you turn it into a corner, it's going to stay planted. No, it wants to, you've probably seen throughout this whole video, counter steering here, counter steering there, turning in here, turning in there, really working the steering wheel, and that is exactly what this car is all about. You've got to work the car. You can't just turn it in and hope that it's going to stick. You've got to manipulate that steering. You've got to manipulate your throttle. Admittedly, I do start going a little bit wild with it, a little bit crazy. Not here, that was a genuine understeer moment, but I do start getting a little bit tail happy, trying to get the tail to kick out and stuff like that, because you can do that with this car. Especially I found in second gear, if you just floor the throttle going into a corner in second gear, and I'm going to do it at the end of this straight, you'll see that the tail really wags out nicely, and I don't mean this straight, I mean the long straight. It really slides out very nicely. So it is definitely capable of sliding. It's definitely capable of oversteer, especially if you shift that weight forward. So if you're hard on the brakes, turn it in sharply, you really get the back unsettled, then you really can get this car oversteering, and you can drift this car very nicely. Of course, this car has to be treated with respect though, so you really have to modulate that throttle as well. You've got to be really know what you're doing with this car. You can't just throw it into a corner and expect it to stick. With that being said, if you go into a corner and you're not shifting the weight around, so you're not hard on the brakes, you know, you're easing into it, you are going to find this car with the heavy front end is going to wash out. It is going to try and understeer no matter what you do. In the slower corners it's sort of okay, but it's the more mid-speed and high-speed corners that you start noticing that understeer, and you start noticing it want to wash out. So you've got to be careful with that. Even here you can just see ever so slightly, you just see a slight waft of understeer followed by a huge kick of oversteer. So that's what I'm just trying to get a handle on, and you'll see here that I actually do that as well. So I hit the brakes hard, I really get that shifting, and then I get the car oversteering, and that's a fairly decent drift for me. And actually that's the thumbnail, that's where I got the thumbnail for the episode. So overall, what do I give this car? Well, I've got to give it, I would have given it a 9.7 out of 10. I really would have, but I've got to knock a little bit down for the sounds. So I'm going to give it something like maybe a 9.2 out of 10. They need to bring that bass in. It's a 9.2 out of 10 for me. It's a really nice car to drive. Like, absolutely fantastic car to drive. I genuinely enjoyed it. It's old school. You've got to work the wheel. It keeps you on your toes, and you really have to modulate with the clutch, the brakes, the throttle. You've got to heel and toe. You've got to rev match. You've got to try and get the car working with you, as opposed to the car just wanting to work with you. You've got to force it into working with you. You've got to be very precise on the movements you do. So with that being said, I think I'm going to end this episode. I hope you enjoyed the review. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit the like button if you like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more videos on Assetto Corsa. Leave a comment in the comments box below letting me know what you think of the Ferrari 250 GTO and whether or not you agree with my expert review. I say expert with quotes. That's definitely in inverted quotes over there. But see if you guys agree or disagree with my review. And last but not least, do support me on Patreon. Link to that is in the description box below. I would massively appreciate your support. It would mean a lot to me. And of course, then you can get access to my Discord channel where you guys can talk about things and influence my content creation just a little bit more. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time in Assetto Corsa.